下午第二场 session 是请到这个 Aaron Isaksen。那 Aaron 他是他自己在2002、2003年开始就投入 mobile market， 然后一直做到现在，也投入了 smartphone market。然后他是Indie Fund 的初始发起者之一，然后他现在也是 Indie East 这个 festival 的festival chair， 就是主席。那我们就欢迎请到他来演讲这个有关 Indie Fund 还有这个游戏发掘议题的一些相关的经验，还有一些调查的整理。
This is working okay? Yeah. Hi, my name is Aaron Isaksen, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk here today. My talk is I'm going to give two talks, and the first one is called Indie Fund, Indies Funding Indies. So let me introduce Indie Fund and tell you about what Indie Fund is. We are 7 indie developers who have all been successful making games, and we decided to invest in other people's indie games. So our main mission at Indie Fund is to help other indies get and stay financially independent. What we mean by financially independent is not that you never have to work again, but that you can make the games that you want to make, and you don't have to worry so much about what your investors are saying. It's more about you having enough money to do what you need to. One thing we do at Indie Fund is we fund games, not studios. So what we mean is we want to see your best game, and we want to help make that game happen. We're not that interested in saying, oh, here's my team of 10 people, we want to make the next 7 games, we want to do this for the next 5 years. It's like, no, take one and do your best one. That's what we want to fund. And we are what's called smart money. So that means that because we know how to make games, we all do it ourselves. We don't just give money to people, but we also give a lot of advice and help make connections. And the opposite of that would be like what's called dumb money or silent money, where maybe if you have a rich uncle or friends or something give you some money, they don't really know anything about the industry, so they can't kind of tell you or help you figure out how to use it. And Indie Fund is also a brand. Basically, the idea here is we only take the best games, and so when somebody says that their game is funded by Indie Fund, that tells people that this is a really good game and very interesting, and you should check it out. And we're not venture capitalists. We are not looking to invest in your company and hope to make some exit when you sell it. Like I said, we're not interested in you selling your company. We're interested in you making a living doing the games that you want to make. So who are the people in Indie Fund? Like I said, we are a group of successful indie developers. There's 7 people. Jonathan Blow, who made Braid and is working on The Witness. Ron Carmel, who is a programmer for World of Goo. Kyle Gabler, the lead designer for World of Goo, and made a game called Little Inferno, which also did quite well. I'm Aaron Isaksen, talking to you today. Kelly Santiago was the president of that game company who made Flow, Flower, and Journey, and she now is at Ouya. Nathan Bella, who runs Cappy Games, most famous for Sword and Sorcery, and they're working on Super Time Force now. And Matthew Wegner, who runs the Indie Game Summit at GDC, and also is working on a game called Aztez, which is coming out next year. So we have funded 13 games so far. The first game we funded was Shadow Physics, and this is our only game that actually never launched. So we lost all our money on this game. This is our first one. That was too bad, but we learned a lot in that process. Our first game to launch was Dear Esther. And this was a really interesting game. This was funded out of, this team is in the UK. So we don't just fund games that are in America, we fund games all over the world. As long as it's legal for us to fund in that country, then we do it. So Dear Esther was out of the UK. Cube was a university team, so these people had no industry experience, but we really loved their game. So we funded a bunch of students to help make their first project. Antichamber, you heard a lot about already. And this was my favorite game that we funded. Monaco, so very recently was the biggest game we funded. We loaned $100,000 for this game, and I think it recouped before the game even launched. So we got our money back based on pre-sales. It did quite well. The Swapper is a game that came out of Finland. Super Splatters was out of Israel. And this was actually a port of an earlier game. We had previously never done anything that was a port. We only wanted to do original stuff, so this was an experiment for us. Space DF9 is a Double Fine game. This is actually our biggest project. We funded it for like $400,000, and Indie Fund didn't do that alone. We needed to raise money from other people as well, so it was a collection of a couple different companies. Mushroom 11 is an unreleased game. It's by Itai Karen out of New York City. Super awesome. That comes out next year. Kachina is another game by Ben Esposito out of Los Angeles. Again, unreleased. Far Away is by Steph Theron, San Francisco. It's been in development for a long time, so hopefully we'll see this soon. Fract OSC is from Canada, Montreal, and it's a really amazing visual audio thing. Panoramical is from Fernando Ramallo out of Argentina, and David Kanaga, who was the audio guy on Proteus. And this one is a really interesting kind of musical audio exploration. So let me talk to you a little bit about the origins of Indie Fund. In 2008, basically the only way you could get money was either to have saved it, or from working in the industry and you saved your money up, or you could get your money from a publisher. And publishers had really bad terms. They took a lot of your IP. They were really difficult to work with. And there was a lot of it was frustrating for many indie developers. And a couple indies had made some money, right? Braid had done really well. World of Goo had done really well. Flow and Flower had done well. My company had made a bunch of money selling mobile games. And so we came up with the idea of loaning this money to other indies. So we first started up a prototype indie fund. It wasn't called Indie Fund yet, and it was 13 different developers from across the world, and we came together and we funded Fez. And this was actually done silently, so we didn't announce who was the people funding it. And we had a lot of trouble with this. And if you see the Indie Game the Movie, Phil talks a little bit about the issues from his perspective. But the main things were, from my point of view, were that the investors, we were really way too active. So we were kind of helping produce the game instead of just funding it. And that was a big mistake because we learned that we need to really trust our developers and just let them run with it. And if we don't trust them, we shouldn't be funding them in the first place. And there was a lot of stress, both internally, the team really didn't get along, or some of the people on that team didn't get along with some other people on the team. And the best thing for us to do was just to separate. So we funded it, not completely, and then Phil went on to get money from Trapdoor and had a quite successful launch. So after that, we learned a little bit, and we created Indie Fund, which we call Indie Fund 1.0 now. And this was we took it down to 7 partners, and we wanted to keep it a smaller group and really figure out how to make this really work with a tight group of people. And it's fixed group size. We can't add or subtract the way it's set up. And we do this on a majority vote. So every partner in the fund gets 1 vote. It's not based on how much money you invest. So each partner puts in a different amount of money, ranging quite a bit difference in the amount of the cheapest to the biggest funder. It's like 10x amount of money. But still, every person gets 1 vote. And that's really good for us because everybody knows what they're doing, and we really want every vote to matter. Let me tell you about our terms and how we actually, what it means to get money from us. So the first thing is that we loan you money, and we don't require you to go into debt for us or to have any collateral. So if your game doesn't launch, we don't end up owning your house or your like dog or something. We we just say like, use this wisely, do what you can, and if the game makes money, then we get our money back. The intention for us is to make our money back. We don't ever want to just give it away. In the beginning, what we do is depending on the amount of money you ask for, we either give you 100% of the money right up front, or we give you half and make sure that you're using it correctly. And then once you launch your game, we get back all our money first. So, and then after we get back the money we loaned you, we then take 25% of your revenue until we double our money. So let's just use an example. Let's say we invested $100,000 in your game. Your game launches. The first $100,000 you make, you give back to us. And then we get 25% of your money until we again, another $100,000. So in the end, we'll make $200,000. You go on, and you're wealthy and financially independent to make your next game. And like I said, you're free after we double our money. We don't continue the contract. And if something goes wrong and your game doesn't do that well, then after 2 years, so we always recoup our money if we can. And then after 2 years, we just kind of go our separate ways. And that's really important, I think, to have these contracts end. Otherwise, you're sending us 25 cents per quarter for like the next 30 years, and it's just not what we want to do. So what do we look for in our games? The most important thing is we really want to see games have some specialness. Something very special about them that'll get people talking. Alexander was just talking about something, a game being remarkable. That's really exactly the same idea. We call it specialness, but being remarkable is exactly what we're looking for in the games that we fund. We want to see that the people who are coming to us with their ideas have the creative ability to get these games done. These games need to be really fun to play. They need to stand out and look really cool and be crafted really well. The marketing ability is very important. We want to make sure that people know how to talk about their games and know how to present them and get people talking and making a buzz about their game. And we want to see that you have the technical ability to do what you're saying. So we don't work with teams that haven't actually built anything yet, because we want to make sure that what we see is actually what you're saying you want to do, you can actually do it. And the best way we can tell this is by getting a vertical slice. So this is kind of like a finished version of your game. Maybe all the content isn't there, but maybe you have the first level. But we can really see how does it play, how does it feel, how does it look, how does it sound, all that stuff gives us an idea of if the game's worth investing in. Our biggest problem in Indie Fund is finding games to invest in. And in the beginning, we had an open submission, so anybody could submit to us. But this didn't work that well because we had over 300 people submit to us, and we only picked one out of that process. It took us a lot of time on our part, and took a lot of developers' time as well. So we changed to a closed submission, which is not perfect. Basically, you have to know us somehow, either at a conference and say we meet here, you give me your card, we talk a little bit, and then we kind of start the conversation, or we know people from mailing list or online. And this kind of shows that you're dedicated and you really know how to push your game forward and how to work on it. That seems to be more successful for us. We want to make Indie Fund even better, so we're right now trying to think about how to improve it. One of the things we recognize is that just getting your game discovered is very difficult. I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. But really trying to help developers get their game discovered is an important thing for us. One way we're going to try to do this is by adding more funders to Indie Fund. And this really gives more people, the more people who are funding it, they can give more advice. There's more time for each of us to work on a game and help out. And just more experience. But right now there's no one who knows how to do multiplayer games on Indie Fund. So if we can fund a multiplayer game, we have some new partners who have experience there that can really help. And we want to do some more bigger games. I think as marketing becomes more and more important, having slightly larger games that people have been working on for more time, those are the games that are going to do better in the future. Not to say that we're not going to fund smaller games anymore. We still want to do that as well. But this is kind of an area that we're looking into. And if we have more funders, we also have more access. We have access to more money. So I talked a lot about Indie Fund. How does this relate to you guys in the audience? The first lesson here is to make sure you guys help each other. Indie Fund was indies in America helping out other indies that we knew. And it's a really important part of our indie community is that we do help each other out instead of competing with each other and keeping things secret. Networking is very important. So making sure that you go to as many places, conferences as you can, spend time online, network over Twitter, just get to know as many people as you can, and there's more opportunities to get discovered and to help out. And lastly, the idea of solving your own problems. So we saw this problem with the community where publishers had a lot of money, and the terms for giving that money out were very bad, and we decided to create a solution ourselves to solve it. Okay, thank you. That's my first talk. We're going to switch over to the second one, and I think we'll do questions at the very end. It's nice to do 2 talks, because then I get twice as many claps. Okay. Making game discovery easy. So what are we talking about when I say the word game discovery? This is the process when a player doesn't know anything about your game and they hear about it for the very first time. And then the player learns a little bit more about your game. They might, actually, let me back up a second. So they hear about your game for the first time, they might hear about it from a friend, they might read about it on Twitter, they might see it on a website, or maybe they'll see it on an online store, like on the Steam front page or in a portal or something. And then a player wants to learn more about the game, so they'll do some more research, they'll look online, they'll read some user forums, they'll read reviews from users and experts, look at Metacritic scores, just kind of understand what the game's about. And then finally, a player will download the game. If it's a free game, they download it. If it's a paid game, they purchase it. They might do this from a Steam store, or a Humble Bundle, or on your website, or portal, whatever. So as developers, discovery is very important to us. Right? Why do we care about discovery? Of course, we want to have players play our games, right? So here, economically, if people aren't playing our games, then we have no chance of making any money. So of course, we want to have as many people play our games as we can. But artistically, we spend a lot of time making these games that we really love, and we want to have as many people experience that as we can. If no one's going to play our games, then why would we even bother making them? Right? So getting players to discover our games is really important to us. The people who are better at discovery are going to be more successful in this business, and that's just a numbers game again. Like, the more people who discover your game, the more people play your game, the more success you're going to have. The marketplace is very crowded. There's lots of game developers. It's much easier to make a game than it's ever been. It's very easy to distribute games now on like iOS. It takes $99 a little, just get your bugs out on Android. It costs, I think, $25, right? So there's so many people distributing games, and you can use Unity or Corona or Game Maker. There's all these tools for making it easier. And so you just have a lot more games out in the industry than there ever were before. And some companies solve this discovery problem by buying users, right? So they spend money on advertising, but as indies, we don't really have the budgets to make this work. It costs like $1 or $2 in America to buy a user. And they're not even guaranteed to pay you any money. That's just a free user who just downloaded it and tried out your game. So the more people you can get to discover your game organically without you having to spend any money, the more success indies are going to have. This is a real disadvantage that I think we have against larger, more well-funded companies. And I think a really important thing here is that discovery is our responsibility as developers. We can't just rely on the stores to do this for us. Featuring only lasts a week, or sale only lasts a weekend. So we really want to make sure that what we do gets people talking about our games. And players also care about this game discovery issue as well. They only want to play the very best games, right? These are the games that they're going to like. They want personalized recommendations for games that that they know that they're going to enjoy. Maybe they'll want to play games that their friends are playing for the social aspects. It's a lot more fun to play a multiplayer game if your friends are playing along. And we just want bug-free games, attractive games, fun games. And we don't want any bad games, right? There's a big cost to playing a bad game. There's a waste of our time, it's a waste of our money. With music, like if I download a bad song, it takes me 3 minutes of my life. That's not a big cost. A movie, the worst that happens, I lose 2 hours. And I'll probably stop watching it after 15 minutes. But if I have a bad AAA game, it might take me like 5 hours before I even know I like it or not. So games have a kind of a media that's very expensive to get a bad recommendation. So what we're going to talk about in this talk is how to make discovery easy. It's not an easy problem, so we're going to have to use we're going to learn a lot about science behind how people think and how people talk and how people share and learn and purchase. And we'll use all that information to kind of help make this discovery problem easier. So the first thing let's talk about is making it easy to hear about games for the first time. Then we're going to talk about making it easier to learn more about games, and then making it easier to download games. All right, the first thing is making it easier to hear about your game for the first time. Again, people might hear about games for the first time via word of mouth, by friends, online, Facebook, or Twitter, reading expert reviews, seeing a trailer, seeing some ads, seeing your game cross-promoted by other games or by a friend's game. Or maybe they'll see it in a download ranking or it's featured on a store. So word of mouth is one of the most important ways that we learn about new things. And Wikipedia defines it as, quote, the passing of information from person to person by oral communication. But for our purposes of this talk, we're going to extend that to social media or Facebook, Twitter, basically anytime you hear something from your friend or something like that. So there's an important paper by Brown and Rengen called Social Ties and Word of Mouth Referral Behavior. And in this paper, they studied how word of mouth spreads. And it turns out that there's two types of social ties that are required. The first type is strong networks. These are things like your close friends and your close family. And these are people you really trust, and they know you very well. So because of this trust, they recommend something to you, you're going to trust that they know you well, and they're going to give you good advice. And we don't think our friends are going to screw us over, our friends are going to do something that's good for us. So we take this recommendation very strongly. The second type of social tie that's required is a weak social tie. These are bridging between different tight social groups. So a weak social tie might be somebody you meet at a party, it might be somebody you meet here at this conference, or a good example would be like at home. Let's say my close friends are playing a game that I really love. I come here to Taiwan, and I meet some of you, and I tell you about the game I'm playing. So now it's jumped from my group in America to your group in Taiwan. You go home and you tell your close friends. And then that's sort of how this information can spread. Now, one thing that's very interesting about word of mouth is it's very important to measure how much people are talking. It doesn't necessarily matter as much if they're saying good things or if they're saying bad things or if they're saying amazing things or just sweet things. It's just really the amount they're talking. There's two important papers that talk about this. One is by Yong Lee called, quote, The Word of Mouth for Movies, Its Dynamics and Impact on Box Office Revenue. And another paper, Duan Gu and Winston, Do Online Reviews Matter? An Empirical Investigation of Panel Data. And these papers both say that volume of word of mouth, but not the valence, offers significant explanatory power for how well something does. So volume would be like the number of people talking, right? So if one game has 1,000 people talking about it, or another game has 20 people talking about it, 1,000 obviously has more word of mouth. And valence would be the average score, let's say, that a game gets. So if one game has an average score of 9, and another game has an average score of 6, the 9 is, more people like the 9, but it doesn't actually mean that it has more word of mouth. It's the volume that's the one that really gives people what they call, quote, a persuasive effect on consumer purchase decisions. So when you hear new information for the first time, you're either going to share it with somebody else, or you're going to ignore it, and it just kind of dies. It doesn't with you. You don't pass it on. And if you have a situation where you keep sharing it, so I share it to somebody, and they share it to somebody, and they share it to somebody, it can create what's called an information cascade. And there's a lot of papers out there that have studied what these information cascades are and how they kind of get spread and how they take off. The important thing would be, like if I share it with 2 people, and each of those 2 people share it with 2 people, and now it's 4 people, and 8, and 16. And so that's what the cascade is about. Is getting it to go, it's called viral, some people say. Like a video that goes viral is one that's gone into these cascades. And the question that some people ask is, how do these cascades get started? And they used to think that it was really important to have influencers, who are people who are opinion makers, who could get these cascades going. And it turns out that they are important, but they're not required. So Watson Dodd's Influentials, Networks, and Public Opinion Information paper studied this and showed that these people don't hurt. Like it's very helpful to have somebody with a lot of followers tweet your idea. But unless you have an easily influenced individuals retweet it, it's not really going to spread very far. So the idea here is that you need to have lots of people, again, talking about your idea, not just having one person with 1,000 or 10,000 followers, but it needs to be them spreading to people, and those people spreading to their friends, and then spreading it to their friends. There's a book called Contagious, Why Things Catch On. It's by Jonah Berger. It is an excellent book, and I strongly recommend anybody who's thinking about marketing their games to read this book. But I'm going to go into the 6 points that the book brings out. So the first thing is, the book studies why do we talk about certain things, and what are the characteristics of the things that we share with each other. The first important thing is social currency. So we share things when it makes us look cool, right? So if I find a new game, I'm really excited to share it with people because I want them to think highly of me because I introduced the game to them. This is how leaderboards work, because when I'm at the top of the charts on the leaderboard, I look really cool. This is why video streaming works. Like when, Alex was saying, when Total Biscuit shows something on his stream, then he looks really cool because he introduced this game to a bunch of people. And this is why we share reviews or share trailers or share games with our friends. Another thing that is required is to have a trigger. And a trigger is something that reminds us about the game that we're playing in order to talk about it later on. So if you're playing let's say a racing game that you're really into, and then you're walking down the street with some friends and a car drives past really fast, that reminds you to talk about the game. If you're playing a game about food or cooking, and then you're at a restaurant with some friends, that's going to remind you to talk about it. If you're playing a game about space aliens, there aren't a lot of triggers in our environment, typically, that would remind you to talk about this sort of thing. And so when you're thinking about a game, you might want to think about one that can be easily triggered. I think this is why a game like Candy Crush is so successful in America, because candy is in our environment. We see it a lot. It reminds us to talk about it. People also share things that they feel strongly about. So emotions is something that's very important to include in your games. Things that make you energized, make you laugh, that make you happy, or even things that make you angry are the kind of things we share. Awe turns out to be a really important emotion. And this is like that feeling that you get when you see something just amazing, right? You see like a beautiful vista, a beautiful landscape. Awe is sort of the emotion that we feel. This could be for a game, you have amazing graphics, or amazing tech, or an amazing story, or amazing visuals. Just something that really we just like, oh, my friends have to see this. This is so interesting. And it turns out also that things that make us sad, although that's an emotion, it doesn't make us want to share. So it's not all emotions are not equal. So that's an interesting point there. And music, I think, has a huge impact on our emotions. So make sure your games have really strong music in order to create these sort of feelings inside people. Things that are public are much easier to share than things that aren't public. So that's, again, why leaderboards and achievements can really help. This is why download rankings and top 10 lists, they can really move units as well. And when you tweet a screenshot or show a video of your game, that's basically what's happening, is you're making that public. Practical value is when we share things that others might find useful. So if I have a game that I think someone's really going to like and I share it with them, that's me giving them practical value, right? They're going to think, oh, thanks, Aaron, for helping me out. And if you have hints for somebody, or you post a strategy guide online, that's you trying to provide practical value for people. And the last thing is that it's much easier to share stories about things than it is to share facts or statistics. So, for example, if I'm playing a game and I said to my friends, oh, I was playing this game last night and I got so into it that I missed my subway stop, and then I went back on the train and I went the other direction and I missed it again because I kept playing it. Like, that's a story that's much more interesting than saying, I played that game for 2 hours. And so people really are much more interested in stories than they are just statistics. So let's do a case study of, let's say, Minecraft. It's an easy game to talk about. And let's look at how Minecraft really hits each of these 6 things. So social currency. Look at this awesome thing I made in Minecraft. Aren't I cool? Like, check it out. You spread it out. You spread it to your friends. They go, oh, that is really awesome. Like, what is this Minecraft game? Triggers. We see lots of things in our environment that might remind us of Minecraft, right? If you're playing with Legos with your niece or nephew, or just bricks in the environment, blocks, even jewelry or gold, these are all things that kind of evoke Minecraft. Emotion, when you see this beautiful Starship Enterprise that someone made out of Minecraft blocks, that's awe, right? You're like, that is crazy, I have to share this video with people. Public, again, so many Let's Play videos online, so it's very easy to just run into things about Minecraft. Practical value, there's so many crafting wikis or just websites that talk about things that you can do in it and how to use redstone circuits and those sorts of things. And finally, the kind of stories you tell people are things like, oh, I was looking for some redstone in this mine, this creeper jumped out, or I got lost one night in Minecraft, and I was gone, but then I found my base. Like, all that kind of stuff, they're stories that are very easy to tell. Even though it's a game about building things, it's the stories that people want to share. And it's not just for our games. We want to do this stuff in our trailers, for example, right? So if I'm making a trailer for my game, I want to make sure it has social currency. I want to make sure people look cool when they share my trailer, so that they're encouraged to do it. I want to make sure that people feel emotion when they see my trailer. They should either feel excited, like, I really want to play that game, that looks so awesome, or they should laugh, it's kind of I can do something funny, or they should just be amazed, like, I can't believe the game is doing that. When this comes out, it's going to be so neat, I have to show my friends. And I think your trailer should also tell a story. It shouldn't just be a collection of screenshots, but it needs to be that story that people are then reminded to tell other people about. When you're doing, so Kickstarter, I think you have something similar to Flying V, I think it was called, and this is a crowdfunding site. But when you're doing your Kickstarters, you know, it's really good practice to learn your marketing message, but you need to make sure your pitch has social currency. So people need to look cool if they are funding your game. They need to feel emotion. They need to feel like they're really helping somebody out if they're gonna, when they see your pitch. A story that's in your pitch is gonna be much more effective than you just telling people, oh, my game will have this many polygons and this many levels. And triggers, again, you know, just doing things in your Kickstarter pitch that will get people to remember it and then be reminded to tell others about it. Now, advertising is really important for many games. I don't have enough time to go really deep into the science of advertising, but if you are doing ads, again, think about the same thing. Social currency, triggers, emotion, make people feel something when they see your ads. It'll make it much more successful. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a lot about learning about games for the very first time. Now let's talk about what happens when people want to learn more about your game. So Philip Nelson wrote a really influential paper called Information in Consumer Behavior. And he categorized things as two types of goods, either search goods or experience goods. And search goods are the easiest types of things to buy. These are things that just basically have a list of qualities, and you can read the packaging and know if it's right for you or not. So an example is like you go to the market and you want to buy sugar. All sugar is the same. It doesn't matter. So you buy the one that's the right size and the right price. If you're buying a chess set, you can look at the chess set and you can say like, okay, I like those pieces. Those look good. And I know the prices. You don't have to know much more other than what's on the packaging. Now, experience goods, however, you need to actually experience before you can know if they're good or not. So that's used a lot in literature is wine. You can read a review about a bottle of wine, but in the end, you don't know if you're going to like the bottle or not until you buy it, open it, and drink it, and then you're like, okay, that was a good bottle, or that was a terrible bottle. So that's an experience good. We only know what value it has after we experience it. And movies, books, restaurants, and video games all are in this category. So Lisa Klein wrote a really important paper called Evaluating the Potential of Interactive Media Through a New Lens, Search versus Experience Goods. And she talks a lot about this process about how we buy search goods and how we buy experience goods. And it turns out that experience goods require a lot of research before we purchase them. So somebody is interested in buying an experience good, like your video game, and they're going to do some research on it to see if they're going to like it or not, until they get to the point where they decide, doing more research is going to take me too much time, it's going to cost me too much. I now have enough information, I'll either buy it or not. And what this means is that experience goods are a lot harder to buy because people have to do this research that takes more time. But on the other hand, experience goods can be more expensive because you're not really competing on price, you're competing on what people feel. So the goal for us to help people discover our games and learn more is to turn the experience goods into search goods. And we do this by giving people as much information about the game as they can, so they can read the packaging, so to speak, and really understand what they're going to experience. This is what demos do, this is what videos of your game do, screenshots, reviews, recommendations. They're all helping turn these experience goods into search goods. So where do players learn more, right? They want to do this. They want to turn an experience good into a search good. Where do they learn more about it? One way is through free games and demos. Right? These don't cost the player anything. They can try your game out for free, and there's very little risk for them, and they can learn a lot more about your game. You still have to market your game. Right? People don't just stumble onto free games. And you have to be careful that you don't give away too much for free, or they'll never have a reason to ever purchase it. But these can be a really effective way of reducing the risk for people. People get a lot of information on reviews or on forums. And there's two papers, Hui, Liu, and Zhang do online reviews affect product sales, the role of reviewer characteristics and temporal effects, and Bickert and Schindler's internet forums as influential sources of consumer information. And these two papers really go into detail about how people perceive information that they read in reviews or on forums. And they found that information on internet forums may have greater credibility than marketer-generated info. So people really trust when they read user reviews in a way more than they do if they read something they think has just been paid for. So people, quote, pay attention to contextual information such as reviewers' reputation and exposure and the source's intentions. I want to talk a little bit about Let's Play videos. Again, Alexander talked a lot about this with Total Biscuit. But basically, I think these are a very effective way to turn experience goods into search goods. The main idea here is that you're watching somebody else do a demo of your game, and that person has their own audience that they need to entertain. And so there's no reason they're ever going to make your game look bad. They're just not going to cover it. If they do cover your game, they're talking about your game for the 20 minutes or 30 minutes or however long the video is, and they're really pitching it to their customers as like an exciting, fun, interesting experience. And so this is a really good way. It's also guided. There's no like, you don't have to worry about it getting any missteps. So you can just really make sure the experience is good for that one person, which then spreads it off to lots of other people. Review scores are something that I think are very dangerous for our community. I'm going to go into a little bit about what's going on here, but this idea that you can turn a whole review into one number, there's a lot of issues with this. And the really important problem is this concept of anchoring. This is a psychological concept where you base your numbers on what other people have previously said. So for example, let's say I play a game and I think internally that it's a 7 out of 10. And then I talk to a friend, and he says first, I think this game's a 5 out of 10. So even though I thought before it was a 7 out of 10, once I hear someone else say 5 out of 10, I might give it a 6 out of 10, because it's kind of in between. Now I talk to another friend, and that friend says, I love this game, I give this a 9 out of 10. Again, I still think the game's a 7 out of 10, but instead I'm going to say it's an 8 out of 10, just because I'm kind of like getting closer to what they said. So now you have a situation where the game's either a 6 of a 10, you feel the same way about it, but for one person you're saying it's a 6, and another person you're saying it's an 8. That's a very big difference. And it's just based on who said a number before you. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens where negative reviews are listened to more than positive reviews. And Livingston, Knack, and Mandrix, the impact of negative game reviews and user comments on player experience, found that if players read a positive review before they played a game, it had no effect on how much they perceived it. It's the same thing as if they read no review. But if they read a negative review first, and then they played the game, they thought the game had lower quality than it did before. So again, just strange stuff that people do based on what other people say first. Social voting is the idea of giving things up votes or down votes. And we have to be careful as players to pay too much attention to this. So Lerman, in the paper Social Networks and Social Information Filtering on Dig, showed that this is really much more like a popularity contest, and that people will get their friends together and they'll all go upvote something that they like. And so you're not really learning anything about the quality of the idea. You're just kind of learning which person is more connected than others. So we have to be careful about social voting. I think this is especially damaging on something like Greenlight, which is supposed to find the best games, but really it's just finding the most popular ones. From Valve's point of view, that might not matter that much, but from a player, we want to find games that are really good. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how players find games for the first time, how they learn more information. Now let's talk about how they download them. I think the most important thing we can do here as developers is to make sure that our game is on as many platforms as we can. And let's look at this from a word-of-mouth perspective, right? So if my game's only on iOS, and I tell my strong network of friends about this game, I say, this is amazing, you all have to try it. They trust me, but my friends who have Android phones can't do anything about it. So the information dies with them. It never gets passed on to their weak networks, and it never moves on into a new network. However, if my game's on iOS and Android, I tell my friends, now suddenly it can jump to the friends that have Android, and then jump off them onto their parents who might have iOS, and then back to Android again. And if my game's also on Facebook, and also on PC, Mac, and on Linux, it can suddenly jump around all these different places. So developing your game in a cross-platform way is super important when you're trying to get your game discovered. And I'm switching my company over to Unity to help solve this, because I can make all the game logic, do all the testing one time, and all I really need to worry about is sort of the user interface in order to get it to be played on many platforms. I want to talk a little bit about the ranking by downloads issue that happens. And the idea here is when you go into an app store or Steam or something, and you see the games like, here are the top 100 games. They're listed by how often they're downloaded. There's a really important paper by Salgak, Dodds, and Watts called, quote, an experimental study of inequality and unpredictability in an artificial cultural market. And they did a really important study based on music, but it totally applies to games as well. And they found that when you have these best-selling lists or most downloaded lists, it causes inequity and unpredictability. I'm going to talk about what that means. So inequity is this sort of rich get richer process, where you get your sales in proportion to how many sales you already have. So the idea is that the games that are at the top of the list are going to get a lot more downloads than the game at the bottom of the list. And this sort of perpetuates the same ranking from day to day. So I built a simulated store model where I had 100 goods for sale, and I had a bunch of agents come into the store, and they just choose something to buy based on how high it was in the store. You do this 100,000 times per simulated day. And it turns out that, yeah, the rankings every day are about the same. If you make it instead that somebody comes into the store and just buys something at random, then every day the ranking completely shifts around. The other thing that happens in this kind of store model is that you can never, if you're at rank 100, you're never going to make it to rank 50 as long as people are preferring things that are higher, because the game that's above you is getting more sales than you, and the game above that is getting more sales, and so there's no way for you to ever get up. But if you get an outside influence, let's say your game gets featured, that can move it up to slot, let's say from 100 to slot 50, and then you'll stick around slot 50 for a while until somebody else comes in and gets featured, and that pushes you down. And the other thing that happens that's important here is that when you jump from 100 to 50, there isn't any momentum that you're gaining. It's not like you throw a ball and it kind of rolls a little bit once it hits the ground. You jump to 50, and then the stability keeps you at 50 until some other event happens outside that moves you again. Another thing that happens with ranking is unpredictability. So we like to think that those top 10 games really deserve to be there, but it turns out that those top 10 games can be there just because they were the games that in the very beginning had some random behavior that made them move up. So we could see this between iOS and Android. You might have a game on iOS do very well, but a game on Android not do very well. And it merely could just be these random fluctuations. In the paper, they did this by measuring different music stores. They created 8 different music stores that all have the same songs, and they found that a song that might have done well in store number 1 might be at the very bottom of the list in store number 2. So what this means is that quality is not influencing these rankings. It's other random outside events that are causing it to move up and down. And this is really bad as developers, because that means that if you make a great game, it doesn't matter that much. You're not necessarily going to be at the top of the list unless you do other things to make your game move up. And as a player, it also means just downloading the top game every week is not going to actually give you the best game. I think it's really important for us to stop thinking of rankings as the main way we're going to market our game, because it's not doing us a service and it's not doing the players a service as well. And the danger here is that every week some game is going to get featured. So yeah, you might be featured this week, but next week you're not going to be, and therefore that's not how you can make long-term businesses that continue. Okay, I've talked really fast and for a half hour about this, so I'm going to wrap this all up and remind everybody what I said. First thing we want to do here is we want to make sure we make discovery for our players easy. We want players to hear about our game for the first time and make that as easy as we can. And word of mouth is a really important way to make that happen. We want to focus on the amount that people are talking, not necessarily that they're saying the best things. So don't sweat it if you get a bad review or so. It's really getting these conversations going that's important. And actually having people disagree about your game is a good thing, right? That creates like a flame war online, and then it's creating more word of mouth. We want to encourage virality as much as we can, and we can do it with these 6 ways. Social currency is making people look cool when they share something. Triggers is reminding people to share something. Emotion is making sure that people care about our game. Public, make it easy for people to see these things about your game. Practical value is something that's going to happen naturally. If your game is good, people are going to want to share it. So really focus on making your game great. And stories are, people tell facts. People don't tell facts, they tell stories. So give them a good story to tell. We got to help players learn more about our game. And the best way to do that is to turn experience goods into search goods. And so we want to give as much information to people about our game, about how they're going to feel when they play it, before they actually buy it. And we want to be careful of networking effects, where people will hear a number and then they'll think about it based on that number. Finally, we want to help players download our game as much as possible. And we want to be at as many places as we can. The more platforms you are on, the easier it will be for your game to get discovered. And finally, I want to encourage us to not rely on rankings or featuring, because they're temporary and they can often work against you. And I just want to remind everybody that discovery is your responsibility. No one's going to do this for you. And if you want to be successful at making games, we have to take the responsibility to make sure that others find our games. So thank you very much. And I think I have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah, thanks.
所以有没有人想要提问？好，那边。
Well, thanks, Aaron, for the talk. I have a question for the indie fund, which is you mentioned about if you invest for specific game projects, but not necessarily the company. So how does this work? I mean, in terms of so you are required them to just recover the revenue from the game, the individual game the fund invests?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we, oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Curious details of how this works.
Yeah. So when we invest in a game, then we only get the revenue from that game back. So if you have, well, first of all, you should only have one game. As an indie person, you should only have one game in development at a time, because if you have 5 games at a time, you're going to go crazy, right? So maybe if you're a bigger studio, this doesn't apply as much. Like Double Fine, they have 10 games yet at once, but we invested only in one game. And the revenue from that one game is what we get paid back. If you're doing consulting work or having other games that you've launched in the past that are still bringing in some money, we don't touch that. And I think Shadow Physics is a good example. So that game didn't get launched, but then Steve went on to make a successful Kickstarter for his new game, Scale. That Scale money is his. He doesn't have to give us any of that money. This is a pretty good deal for indies to do it that way. It's not, you go to the bank, they're not going to do that for you.
好，我们大概还有时间，有2个问题，有没有还有要发问的？楼上，来。
我想问一下，就是我们对怎么样把把经验性商品转成搜寻性商品很有兴趣。那能不能举更多的例子？就是除了透过实况跟刚刚所演讲里面内容以外，有没有一些比较更多然后更具体的例子？那另外就是刚刚最后说不要依赖排行东西。那 因为你刚刚前面也提到说数量其实会是最重要的一个东西，那又说购买玩家其实是一个非常昂贵的行动。那如果是一个新的产品、新的游戏，那要怎么在一开始的时候，就让我们的玩家或消费者知道？就这2个问题，谢谢。
So I missed the first question, but I think I'll just answer the second question because I probably don't have time for 2 questions anyway. But I encourage you to come find me after and ask me the first question. So the second one was how do we get things started? And that is really difficult. I think the important thing is to take time and to not rush into this. I think you don't make your game and then be like, all right, it's done, let's start talking about it. Because you probably are really done with your game at that point. You're not excited about it anymore. So I think that talking about your game before it's finished, when you're still really interested in it, get that process started, make experiments. It doesn't cost very much if, in the very beginning, if you get like 10 people or 15 people to like it, some of them don't like it, you know, that's okay, it's not like demoralizing. But if you launch your game and then you find out that no one likes your game, that's like really hurts your feelings, and then you don't want to work on your game anymore when you really need to be talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. So in the beginning, how do you do it? You got to, you know, Alex spent like 50 minutes talking about ways that he made it happen, but I think that's a really important thing is take small steps, get your friends to like it. If your friends don't like it, figure out why, then take it to a wider community, show it to more people, find out why they don't like it. If they are liking it, encourage them to share it more. Try to bake these ideas about making it easy for people to share into your game itself, and just do lots of experiments and keep at it and stay confident that it'll work out as long as your game is good.
OK， 那我们因为时间的关系，就是我们要进入了这个中间的 break 的时间。那我们这场休息时间是30分钟。那如果还有想要请教前面几位外国讲者问题的，可以就直接到前面来，或者是大家可以用这个时间去看一下3楼外面的摊位跟2楼就是在展示的摊位。那就再给 Aaron 掌声，谢谢。